Okay, this is a board meeting. Some of the members of the board, most people are, except for Pedro back there on the top, is still on the board. And Pedro was an original office manager for the Texas Civil Rights Project in Houston. And there's members there and their families that are part of the board. And we're right in front of the South Texas Human Rights Center in Falfurrias, Texas, right there. So you can change that slide, please. And our mission is, when I first got there, of course, it was an issue of the deaths. And I was, I was working in Corpus Christi, taking care of my parents, and of course, it was startling and disheartening that all those people were dying and right in our backyard, and only 75 miles from Corpus Christi, and people are unaware of what's going on in terms of the totality of the problem, and also the number of deaths. In 2012, there were 130 deaths in Brooks County alone. So our definitive mission, of course, is to end migrant deaths and the suffering that migrants go through while they're out there in the brush and trying to circumvent the checkpoint. Organizing families searching for missing migrant loved ones is a very, very daunting effort in terms of they're in Central America, they're in Mexico, they're all over the United States in terms of the calls that we receive. So it's very, very, and that effort it's fledgling right now, but I think we're going to undertake it again this coming year, and basically to do an educational program and inform people of conditions may be changing in the political atmosphere or the social atmosphere. So we're going to establish, we're working on a consistent basis, human rights forensic infrastructure to identify missing and unidentified undocumented border crossers. That is an incredible process, and we compare things to what's going on in Arizona. Two main corridors of migrants crossing into the United States are the Arizona border, of course, California, but the Arizona border, and then also the Texas border. And in around the early mid 2000 is where the influx of migrants on the Texas border began, and we've surpassed Arizona. Organize and advocate for a humane, fair, and just immigration policies. Again, it's a major contradiction in this country that essential workers and the pandemic, the COVID crisis certainly creates the stark reality in terms of who is the essential worker and who has provided very basic work in this country to keep the country functioning on some very basic level. So we need the labor, and we need because it's just a shortage of labor, period, in this country, and to not have a humane and fair immigration policy is it's the tool to really maintain a major class of people, exploitable and very vulnerable. You can change that, please. We have its objectives is promote policies that do prevent migrant deaths, and I'll try to explain a little bit. We in trying to create those protocols, we in terms of the forensic aspect of it, but water stations is something that we are always constantly continuing to maintain in South Texas. We will never have enough water stations. and the families, as I mentioned earlier, strengthen the capacity of families to locate missing loved ones. Without a very systematic and process to investigate and to locate and to search for their loved ones, once they cross into the border and go into the brush, it is a very, very difficult process. And no, we're a small but effective NGO, but no other organizations in Texas is trying to do undertaking efforts to undergo to search and find missing loved ones. So it does occur in Arizona in terms of the no more deaths, and there are some other organizations out of California, Las Águilas del Desierto, that do go and search for bodies and remains in Arizona desert out there. So the increase of public awareness of migrant deaths and the militarization of the border. When somebody and maybe take a note here. When somebody speaks of militarization, what do people think? I mean, they say, well, what are they talking about? So checkpoints epitomizes. And they're all on the southern border of Mexico and the United States. Checkpoints exist from the tip of Port Isabel down here in South Texas, all the way to San Diego, to Tijuana, and in that area. And checkpoints have become a reality in terms of people having to deal with that. And then you increase the militarization, you increase the Border Patrol agency in terms of doubling and tripling and quadrupling the number of agents. At this point, we're talking about over 20,000 agents that exist on the U.S.-Mexico border. I remember asking one of the commissioners or one of the Border Patrol commanders and saying, well, how many agents are enough? And he did not answer. He did not answer my question. Next slide, please. Brooks County Brooks County recovered remains and skeletal remains, and these are records, actual records from Brooks County that we have access to. We have a partnership, an MOU with the Sheriff's Department, and in terms of taking the missing persons calls. I can imagine in terms of their resources having to take, in some days, 5 to 10 calls a day from families that are drastically, desperately looking for their loved ones. 743 is that number at the end of 2008, and I'm on the process of updating the slide. 2019 was an additional 50, and so that's makes it 793. And this year we have a total of 31 that have been recovered. Just recently recovered body was number 31 this year. So we're talking about over 800 bodies that have been recovered and remains in Brooks County alone. And so we are, and those are the bodies that have been recovered. For the sheriff, for everyone that has been recovered, the sheriff, Benny Martinez, may say that there's 5 more out there. I don't know how to guess that or estimate that. I mean, I can estimate it by the number of calls that we get of people searching for their loved ones, and the category of people that we do not find and that are not in detention or being apprehended. So just to say that for every one, additional 2. So we're talking about over 2,500 people, maybe just in Brooks County. and in the border, estimates go to 7,000 plus over the last decade and a half. And if you take that same number and create a reasonable, um, you know, educated perspective of the number, we're talking about over 20,000 people that have perished on the U.S.-Mexico border, and that's definitely a humanitarian crisis that nobody knows about. And are to the degree of immigration policy being the collateral lives that have been lost. I saw some figures recently of the estimates of deaths in the Mediterranean. South Texas, you can compare South Texas to the Mediterranean Sea in terms of it being a graveyard of unrecovered, detected bodies and skeletal remains that exist all over South Texas. Can you change that slide, please? And this was the numbers for for 2019, and then we finished with another 4. So that number, is what I explained to you, was 829. Can you change the slide, please? This map reflects to you. This is the county of Brooks County, and then the county on the east side of that, over there where you see 77, that is a bit of Clayburgh County, Kennedy County, and Willacy County, all the way down to where you see all the way down to the border. And then on the west side of it, you're talking about Jim Hogg County, Stark County on the corner, and then also Hidalgo down on the south of it. We're north of Hidalgo County, which is a border county. Brooks County is not a designated border county, and it does not mean that means it's not receiving border monies directly because of not being on the border of the international line. So as you can tell, that yellow line in between is Highway 281. And it does virtually, divide the county into half. But the last half of people's journeys, once they enter the brush, is where people die. And each one of those, marks there reflects of recovered GPS coordinates of where bodies were recovered in Brooks County. Next slide, please. This number here does reflect when prior to the pandemic setting in mid-March of this past year. So these are all through the end of 2019. We're compiling all our numbers now for 2020. It does, there are 2 sets in 2020, and I'll discuss that in a bit. We received new cases or new calls from 1,647 people. Those are people of parents, husbands, wives, brothers, sister, cousins, of people saying my loved one, my husband crossed the border, my sister crossed the border, and I have not heard from them. And then so during this particular period, individuals, as the case was, and was for the detention system, or the incarcerating people that whose only crime is crossing the border, and which was prior to 2001 or 2000, 911, the people were, it was a misdemeanor. It wasn't a criminal act. It was a misdemeanor in terms of violating and crossing the border. So prior to that, and we still have the private prison system in this country that deals, with incarcerating, criminalizing, incarcerating people and maintaining people in the detention centers for corporate profit. Nothing else, no other reason than for detaining people for administrative holds. These are just detaining people administratively for their day in court, or for when they can appear before a judge in the immigration court and plead their case, or get some type of relief based on existing immigration and asylum laws. So you have, and then of course we're always attempting to do search and rescue and recovery attempts, and this is very critical in terms of our efforts of trying to maximize our efforts to save people, to recover people, and then recover skeletal remains for identification purposes and assisting families. This is probably the more difficult part of our work, basically because families don't have very much information about when people, their loved one has crossed the border. And our basic intake does reflect, what port of entry did you cross at? When, what was that date? And it's just an approximate area, because this is where the fence already exists, where barriers already exist in all port of entries. And after 911, this is where George Bush got authorization to expand fences or walls from the port of entries. And what did that do? That forces people to the more dangerous areas, the more perilous areas, the more precarious areas, and that's in terms of people trying to get through. So that's where people tend to go and get lost. So because of the extension at port of entries or where those barriers and walls exist. So we have 37 rescues, and then you have the number of the 1647 calls that we got. We are 539 cases are still pending. That is, roughly, a third of that number, of the top number there in terms of people that we have no idea. Well, we may have a sense of where they crossed and where they entered the brush, and it is very difficult, and where they in Hidalgo County, or were they in Brooks County, or they wound up in Jim Hog County, or one of the eastern counties closer to the Gulf. But this is 539. Whose duty, burden, obligation to search for those people and investigate those cases? The federal government takes no responsibility for its prevention by deterrence policy, and that is the policy: prevention by deterrence. In terms of trying to make it deterring people from coming, and that this is the way that they will stop coming. Let's go back a little bit into 1986, when the IRCA law was passed, Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. And that's when this whole process began in terms of trying to keep people from crossing. So they passed a law that made it against the law for you to hire somebody without the proper documentation, and that's on the civil side for employers. And they also made it against the law criminally for you to present yourself with the proper documentation to work. So we often refer to this as the criminalization of the workplace. And I always say, what the crime is wanting to work and provide for your family some very basic human rights. That's the crime that we are uh, um, jailing people, putting people in jail for at a rate right now of 50,000 people a day, prior to the pandemic. So that's the contradiction that exists. Next slide, please. The water stations are a critical component, and I think most people do realize or do know the South Texas Human Rights Center in terms of our initial efforts to try to mitigate and prevent people from dying. We're rapidly, we're getting to 200. I try to build another 30 stations this summer prior to all of this occurring, to the crisis, the virus crisis that we entered into, and still practicing, creating some new protocols in terms of keeping our volunteers still wanting to come in and at a safe distance, and providing and building new stations. We build a lot of new stations on Highway 77 and then the surrounding areas and in the back roads of Brooks County. 7 counties in and around Brooks County are where we have stations, and we'll try to get more. Unless this policy changes anytime soon, people are going to still keep on coming. The pandemic has not necessarily slowed down people from coming. Construction of those water stations is roughly about $75 in materials, and then to maintaining is with water, that's 125 gallons a year. In terms of consistently changing and putting new water. So it depends on the usage. That some of the areas there's more usage, there's more traffic, and just like Border Patrol, it's a guessing game for us in terms of where the new trails are, where people are entering the brush, where they're coming out of the brush, where are the pickup points and stuff. And here in Texas, I haven't had my working relationship with Border Patrol is constructive, is one of it's in progress. And we developed the missing migrant protocols, and that's what I want to relate to the people there, that, and it just because of the nature of or the character of one person that was the patrol agent in charge in Brooks County in Falfurrias Station. When I first started, I'm showing up at the Border Patrol station with five names, 10 names, calling them consistently and saying, I need to know whether these people have been detained or not detained. And because that way I can inform their family that they're in detention, they're safe. And there's a relief to that point. There's a relief, and people know, okay, realize, well, they'll be deported, but they will have another day. They will live, they will not perish. And that's a major relief point for families. That's not the case right now. But at the same time, when I was showing up at the station, they didn't know how to handle this. They didn't know if they were running the same protocols or releasing information to me, whether somebody was being detained or not being detained. That's the difficulty we have in terms of the callousness or the indifference or of agencies that are designated to uh, patrol the border, and their cloak of secrecy and not being transparent in terms of being able to relate to me, an NGO, whether somebody's being detained. That is basically the only information that I get. Whether somebody has had a the most recent episode or encounter with Border Patrol that says yes, this person has been detained and apprehended. I don't get nothing else. I don't get where that occurred, what time that occurred, um, um, where that person was sent to, and where he was processed, and wanted, and where's that person being held at. I have to refer the families to the consulates of each country, and they're also short of resources. And most, a lot of times the families say, well, nobody answers the phone. We can't get a straight answer because they want to establish, consulates want to establish that the person is related to the person that's missing. So that it gets very they're very apprehensive or very hesitant to provide the information that families want to know. Because most consulates wind up interviewing people once they're in detention. The last phrase there on the water stations does relate to a particular grant that we got from the International Committee of the Red Cross to modernize our water stations. And, they developed some software that does weigh the water. We had some difficulties with internet reception, and it was in terms of receiving that data and maintaining the power for that software to continue to work. Um, 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 and then so we developed that. We'll continue to work with the International Committee of the Red Cross to perfect that model. That model has worldwide, global implications of where it can serve. It's got a solar panel. It can survive in very remote areas, and that would be the best. In some of these countries, the Mexican desert, all over the world, where migrants are crossing have major transit areas, and Africa and other areas where this project could become a more beneficial or an asset for migrants in terms of having access to a larger capacity of water and our some first aid supplies. Next slide, please. This kind of reflects the area here in South Texas, and I did appreciate the map of where the Presbyterian Church has their border projects, and so people are very familiar with the South Texas area. The dark areas are where, along with the Forensic Border Coalition, we are cemetery mapping, and trying to find all the unidentified, the Jane Does, John Does, or Juan Sanchez, or Maria Garcia. These are very, that are people that are not identified and buried without DNA being taken. And that's one of the biggest obstacles that we have in terms of Brooks County, and I'll refer to that in terms of the fact that when we arrived in Brooks County, knowing that there were deaths, and the reason that we went into Brooks County and people were dying and being recovered. We had no idea what the protocols were when counties were encountering an unidentified human remain, what protocols they were following. So in Arizona, those protocols are pretty set. They have a medical examiner system, Pima County, all the bodies go to one county. It's very centralized. Texas does not have a medical examiners in every county. There's maybe a dozen medical examiner offices, one in El Paso, one in Laredo, and there is and the rest in Brooks County, Hidalgo County, Cameron County, border counties, Stark County. All those counties are dependent on the justice of the peace, an elected official who can be whose regular job is being a mechanic, or you don't have to have any legal background or any forensic background. You can run for JP as being a mujer del hogar, or just a rancher or farmer, and then you're thrust into the situation where that JP has to go to the site where a body has been recovered and just rule on the body. And all they do is say, well, when they get there, that's the time of death, and death by the elements or death by dehydration, and that's it. And then the bodies must be referred to. They must do an autopsy, and they must extract DNA samples from that body and submit those to the University of North Texas, that manages the National Identification Center for this world, for this country, for the United States, and it also manages NAMUS, which is a system of the missing and the unidentified. Next slide, please. So these are 18 counties. Now, hold up a second. 18 counties, back up a little bit. These are 18 counties where we do have, we've done maybe 6 or 7 of these counties. Just recently, the team, Dr. Kate Spradley, University of Texas State University, called me up and she says, hey, we're going to go into Zapata. And at that time, I could not go in with them. The role that South Texas Human Rights Center plays is we lay the groundwork, the field work with all the public officials in terms of determining where the burials exist, what records they have, get signatures from them to do exhumations for identification purposes, and educate the public officials in terms of what the process is to try to make exhumed bodies that have not had any DNA taken and process those bodies. Brooks County in itself, when we first got into Brooks County, the 2 main obstacles in terms of what we encountered was you cannot, the private property, as opposed to Arizona, where there is mostly public land, and so it's very difficult to enter private property. And I have my ranch protocols, and establishing relationships with ranchers is very critical in terms of placing water station in these ranches. And then also the most important part, of course, is entering with a team from Dr. Spradley's from Texas State University in terms of, and University of Indianapolis, to do searches for skeletal remains and bodies. We cannot do that without having permission, and it is very important that those relationships continue to develop in Brooks County and other ranches so that we're able to do the line searches necessary. Nobody else, no other agency No other government, no federal government, no state agency, no local agency has undertaken this task in terms of doing the investigations, but doing the search for and recovery of skeletal remains. So we've got all these counties right here. These are 18 counties where we think that it's important to try to document and gather data of where people have been buried. And in Zapata County, for example, records indicate that there may be over the last years, and I made a reference call to the county treasurer who's been there for 18 years in that position. So those people know everything that's going on and know when they find a body and where that body is. And they're very gracious, very accommodating in terms of trying to help us plot and survey all these cemeteries where these bodies are at for later exhumation as when the pandemia, the coronavirus issue subsides and we're able to do those exhumations. So next slide, please. So these and again, I've on purpose have left these recommendations that I did 5 years ago. And why these recommendations existed then, and they exist now in terms of what's the approach over the last 15, 20 years in terms of immigration. It's not an immigration issue or migration issue. The approach of the United States government has been one that shifted in 9/11 to a national security question. People, and that plays into, of course, the demagoguery, the xenophobia, the hate, and the rhetoric that politicians can use to get into office and scapegoat and target a population that basically is a population that provides essential work in this country. So if you have enforcement, if you increase the militarization, and let me give you the example of Texas. And because I live in Texas and we understand Texas, Governor Perry, he nationalized the Guard and sent troops down to the border. Then you have that started, and then you have the increase border militarization with increased border patrol agents, and then you have the checkpoints. Then you have another governor trying to outdo Trump and do his surge in the border and send the state troopers down to almost a tune of $1 billion to give tickets to poor people in these poor counties to stop people, and just to prove that he is trying to secure the border. And then you have the state of Texas passing a law, SB 4, that allows local police to inquire about people's immigration status in the cities everywhere, and out in the open, out in the rural areas, in the urban areas. So that in that sense, and then you have all the equipment and everything that I don't know if anybody's seen one of those aerostats, the eyes in the skies at a tune of $1.5 million. There's about, I think I've seen 5 down in the valley, and that are used for surveillance. That's the whole question of enforcement and the militarization of the border. And that's why, Texas is, at this stage with SB 4, that law is stronger than the one that Arpaio was trying to enforce in Arizona, was enforcing in Arizona. And so under that specter is what immigrants in Texas live. Due process and admittance based on family resident ties. This is something, there's no due process. The asylum process that exists right now is a sham, and Trump has done away with it. Public law number 42, in terms of expelling anybody that came to the border, increase the rate of people going missing from what you saw earlier, and I explained earlier, maybe 30% people are still missing. Now, when people are expelled, we're talking about 80% of people that go missing. 20% are the only ones that have contact with Border Patrol, and they're immediately expelled. That means 80% of 10 calls we get, 8 people are missing. We have more asylum and victims of crime and domestic violence. Those are things that right away Sessions, when he was the Attorney General, did away with in terms of domestic violence visas and victims of crime. Transparency, we have already talked about that. I mean, a United States Senator cannot get into a child detention facility. Why? You know, and that's where the whole question of the transparency in terms of what's, you know, what it's sort of like, you know, what country are we living in? And then this is all under the new the present administration. So we need more accountability of Border Patrol. It's the largest civilian police force in the country, and there's no mechanism, no process to hold them accountable for their use of force. Question: when you have a Border Patrol agent being able to shoot a young man across the border and not be held accountable, something's wrong with that system in terms of being holding people accountable. Initiate you know, the whole question of Brooks County not being a designated border county. I mean, it's preposterous when all the 85 migrant deaths for the consulates in the Valley occur in Brooks County, and it's not a designated. 7 years we've been trying to get a legislation passed to reimburse counties for all costs associated with migrant deaths. And this past, maybe in the lame duck session, there might be an effort to pass some legislation that that can be on a grant system, that people can, universities like Texas State University and the South Texas Human Rights, we can maybe ask, submit for a grant, and Brooks County submit their bills for what they have incurred over the last. And I know that a sheriff did a tally. They've incurred over $1 million plus, and this was up to 2014, I believe. This is 6 years later. So we've got equal and humane treatment for border crossers. Again, that's something I've already talked about. Next slide, please. Our MOU, I mentioned that with Brooks County. It's a model, it's a template that can be in terms of sharing and of information and being able to track people that are going missing. A lot of these counties, you know, don't take missing persons reports. People know that they cross from Matamoros into Brownsville, Cameron County. I doubt whether they have any missing persons reports, and the sheriff's department there. How do they, you know, what are their records regarding recovery of bodies and remains? And then you have a privatized pathologist, forensic pathologist, that does the autopsies, and that's it. But basically it's a system that tries to keep the cost down and less of autopsies and people trying to figure out who are the identification of recovered bodies. Borstar is an independent, should be independent of Border Patrol. They're good people that do search and rescue, and I try to connect with these individuals, but they're not in every station. They may be shifted around, so to do search and rescue is very, very difficult, and in terms of resources. And the Missing Migrants program that we had developed there out of Falfurrias to set up these categories of with Border Patrol, and then category 2 and 3 is rescues and recoveries. Okay, so more cadaver dogs, more independence, more technology. That's always the 911 system is not a guarantee, but it can work. People can be rescued if they're in distress, and we're trying to maximize that effort and that 911 technology needs to be upgraded because it depends on the commercial cell towers of the telephone companies. Somehow the 911 system is a COG thing, a Council of Government things. It's centralized, and so those 911 towers need to be installed that are in the frequency so that people can be rescued. More resources and personnel, and then the civilian and search and rescue operations. There exists for natural disasters. We don't have them for migrants. Migrants are the crisis, the humanitarian crisis. They're expendable. And then we're trying to, myself right now, we're trying to, with Águilas del Desierto, they operate out of California and do some work in Arizona. Hopefully we can establish a base in El Paso so that they can work the Texas border starting there, the Big Bend area. There's a lot of people that are going missing right now in that area. They're crossing there, very remote. And hopefully we'll be able this coming year try to develop a search and rescue or search and recovery team out of El Paso. I think that's it. One more, yes. I wanna relate to you in terms of. I thought I had a slide here that deals with the Forensic Border Coalition. As I mentioned, this is our major group that is trying to establish these protocols in South Texas, forensic protocols. And it is composed of the South Texas Human Rights Center, the Argentine Forensic Anthropology team. They're based in Mexico City, Argentina, Buenos Aires, and then they have an office in New York. Fact Center, which is Dr. Kate Spradley, and Operation Identification that operates out of Texas State, and then the Calibri Center for Human Rights in Tucson, Arizona. We are one of the major efforts to try to identify people and that have been recovered, and then working with families who have placed their family reference sample, their DNA family reference sample, in banks, forensic banks in El Salvador, in Honduras, and also in individual states in Mexico, and take those family reference samples and DNA and cross-reference those with the CODIS DNA that exists, say for instance, Texas. It's taken us 7 years to try to do that cross-referencing. There could be hundreds of identifications, but it's a moving target. And having negotiations with the FBI and having negotiations with being facilitated by the Institute of with the State Department and Department of Justice. Um, so so we had to present with the to the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, OAS, and now we're trying to get a pilot program that will do these cross referencings. I think for now, I mean, I know that we're running a little bit behind. I don't know whether that's how fast I was going here and trying to cover some of this area, but I'm open for questions and anybody that in terms of my presentation. Thank you very much. I really do appreciate the opportunity. I know that without the Presbyterian Church and the support that they've given the center, we wouldn't be where we are right now. It's always been very timely, some of the efforts. And thank you, Kelly, for asking me to present here.
You're welcome. Thanks, Eddie. Eddie, I do have a couple of questions. So the first question comes from Reverend Isabel Rivera Velez. And you were able to meet her when we visited your Human Rights Center in Falfurrias back in January. And her question is, have any of the landowners of the bush taken sympathetic responsibilities for the whereabouts of people who cross into their properties? And also, are any of them our friends?
I have, when I first got into Falfurrias, into Brooks County, I attended Border Patrol meetings that they did with the ranchers, liaison meetings with the ranchers. And some meetings were painful because of racist comments, very raunchy jokes. But in the beginning of the meetings, I would introduce myself and present myself to different ranchers and explain to them what I was trying to do. Most ranchers do not want to see death in their ranches. They don't want to see human lives being, they have the political perspective that people should not be trespassing or crossing through their ranches. But I don't think they have a full comprehension of the globalization of why people are coming and the root causes of why people leave. But most people are very humanitarian, and we approach this is humanitarian aid in terms of what we're doing. And most people reflect their humanitarian perspective in allowing us to do water stations. The pandemic issue, I was getting ready to, like I mentioned, trying to do more water stations and reaching out to some of the ranchers that was going to introduce me to other ranchers in terms of putting in water stations. The support is there in terms of the general compassionate consciousness of ranchers. They may be very conservative in their politics, but I think most people do not want to see death in their ranches. Example, Cage Ranch. One of the larger ranchers, Mr. Cage, has been very, very supportive. I've got 25 water stations in that ranch, and I could probably build more. And I've been able to do line searches and search-ins for remains and bodies in there. So there is support, and you can see it in the water stations. With when we were servicing those water stations, people tend to come by and drop water in them. Small, cases of water, of the individual bottles of water. So there is support. I think it did help in terms of the stations or the water stations being a blue barrel with agua. It does change the narrative and people understand what's going on.
So I have another question from Richard and Susan. What keeps gangs, cartels, or others from stealing the electronic equipment developed by Trinity University on the water stations?
In a lot of, we deal with people that get lost and, migrants, and there's maybe a group of 10 or so. And I didn't mention, but one of the main reasons people do get lost is that, they're the encounters that they have with Border Patrol out in the brush. And if there's a group of 10 or so, and then Border Patrol, tries to surprise them and come upon them, then people scatter everywhere, and not everybody is recovered, and people get lost. And so in most cases, the water is out there for stragglers and in the beginning in route and stuff. But the the gangs and stuff like that. I haven't seen any evidence of that in terms of people trying to um, mess with the water or the electronic equipment. I've had people put slogans of "build a wall" in water stations, and at the same time leave the water in place. So they may have their politics, but you would expect that they would steal the water and spill out the water, but no. I mean, people may express their politics and they leave the water in place because people don't want to see migrant deaths.
I also have a comment and questions from Mark Adams from Frontera de Cristo in Agua Prieta. Eduardo, thanks for the great work that you and the South Texas Human Rights Center is doing. Do your sheriff departments and local police participate in Operation Stone Garden and 287G programs? And also, has Senator Cornyn been helpful with increasing funding for search and rescue?
One of the initial questions is Stone Garden is a source of money for cash-strapped counties. I know Brooks County has Stone Garden monies, which we've had I've had some discussions with the sheriff regarding that, but it is again their budget is always short, and they're dependent on asset forfeiture monies, and I think the Stone Garden monies are passed through other counties that are border counties, and that the sheriff in Brooks County has to go through in terms of getting those Stone Garden monies. I mentioned trying to 7 years trying to get some additional monies from federal government, and just very recently, Cornyn's office reached out to us. It was a bipartisan bill that actually Kamala Harris and Senator Cornyn had co-sponsored in terms of trying to increase is that same bill that we're talking about, and we've been trying for 7 years to try to get reimbursement for counties. So Ana Garcia from the Valley has been a very a good resource in terms of us communicating and relating terms of what is going on the ground regarding the migrants and the issues that we have. And some legislation, but not any search and rescue monies. I spoke with somebody from the state of Texas last night. Maybe we will try to, this legislative session, try to get some monies from the state regarding search and rescue operations, because I think they're very needed and extremely needed. And we'll see how much support we'll get from the state senator regarding that.
Okay. And Dorothy has a question, well, comment and a question. Thank you so much for this valuable information. How many of these cases are children or adolescents, and how many of them are missing?
In most cases, very there's no children. Maybe approaching 18 years old, 17 or 18 years old, in that regard, but very little. It's mostly single men that are above 20, and I've seen more this past year. I think I've seen more women coming through than usual, but most cases it's single men that are trying to make it through. And if children are involved, the pandemia or the public law number 42 is very cruel in that aspect, because even unaccompanied children are dumped back to their governments or back to the border in Mexico, and that becomes a resource issue for the Mexican government, and trying to, okay, well, I have a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old little girl unaccompanied, what are we going to do? And that becomes very dangerous for young kids. So I think, again, that's the most cowardly thing that the administration has done in terms of the separation of parents and children. And it just reflects the fact that the United States is one of the only country, as I can tell, that has not signed on to the international protocols on the protection of the children.
Okay, so that wraps things up. We don't have any other questions. Thank you again so much, Eddie, and keep doing the good work.
Yes, thank you,
Well,
Eddie.
Thank you very much. I hope it was informative for people, and that I hope your conference has much success. I think you've got a lot of participants I can see here that are participating on virtually. It's the tool that we have nowadays, so we got to maximize it as best we can. I did a global webinar about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, and it came out of the Philippines, and a similar presentation. And there was about 250 participants on there. But I think that this is very good. And again, thank you for inviting me to participate.